Obviously to open Unity right here. Okay, so when Unity opens, you'll get a page like this. If you haven't already made an account, you need to make an account, and that account essentially lets you access your project from maybe different computers. And if it's your own personal computer, then it allows you to basically access all of your projects, even if you can't find it. So once you get a like ID and password and all that, why don't you just log in and you'll see this page. Obviously, mine has a whole bunch of projects right here. That's because I've done some projects in Unity already. Yours is probably empty, or it probably says like my first project or something like that. Just ignore that for right now, and we're just going to click new. Okay, so hopefully, unless you have the very newest edition, you'll see this page. So where it says project name, I would probably name this like first project, because this isn't really much of a game. It's more of like a lecture. So let's get started with that. The location, I usually like to store mine in the desktop because I can view it the easiest. You can see some of them right there, right next to League of Legends and Skype and some other games that I would like to play. So if you click this button right here, the triple dot, then you'll probably see something like this if you own a Mac. I'm not sure about what Windows looks like, but you can essentially choose where you want to save the folder at. So once you've chosen that, I want you to make sure that you click on this 2D right here, and that it actually lights up pink or red or something like that, because that lets you create a 2D space rather than a 3D. And this asset packages right here, yeah, don't worry about that for right now. That lets you import things from online, and we'll be getting into that once we actually start making an actual game. So let's click create project, and it will take time to load, of course. And there, that's a 2D space. You can zoom in and zoom out by scrolling up and scrolling down. And here's an asset folder, so I'm going to be getting into that once we actually go to the lecture. So this is a lecture that I used right there. So let me just go through it one at a time. So this is just teaching you the basics of Unity. Okay, so here are the basic terms. This is going to be a little bit boring. You don't have to read all this. I'm just going to be going through some of them, explaining them to you briefly because they're important terms, and I'll be mentioning that throughout the club meetings. So asset. Okay, so the first thing is an asset, which is basically everything. So once you open your first project, you will notice here that it says assets. That folder is basically a master folder where you can pretty much put everything that you make. So it will contain pretty much everything that you do in terms of like video game development. So the second thing is scene. So scene is this black space right here that you see right there. Scene is essentially the place where, like every time you open an app, then you can see the screen and like all the components that the creator decided to put onto the screen. It's essentially the place where the viewers can see. And it's essentially where you can put different characters and like different platforms and all that on there. We'll be making a 2D platformer game, so the scene will contain something like obstacles, characters, and maybe platforms. Okay, game objects. Okay, so game objects is very important. Game object is essentially everything that you'll be seeing here. Game objects are part of the scene, and one of the common game objects that people like to use is probably character. Character is probably something that you'll be using in. It's a type of a game object that you'll be using in almost every single game. So from a simple ball to maybe like an actual complex character to 3D characters that maybe we can get to later on, they're all called game objects. So components. Don't worry about components for right now. I'll be going over that once we actually get into the examples. But think about it as just physics. Okay, like gravity and mass and friction, those kind of things. They're usually called components. There are more, but those are probably the only ones that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so the next one. Alright, so some more terms right here. So scripts. Scripts are essentially like your code, pretty much. It allows you to tell the character or some object or game object, let's get technical here, some game object to do something like character move forward. That would be done through a script. Prefabs, they're a little bit complicated of, they're more complex form of what I showed you here, which is game objects. They're a little bit more complicated. Essentially you can think about it as a variable. So if you create a game object, then you'll automatically get its default settings. So like the position is 0, 0, 0. The size is maybe 1, x equals 1, y equals 1, and z equals 1. But in prefab, you can set that. And if you make it into a prefab, then it'll basically keep the same settings. So that even if you try to reuse it, it won't go back to its default setting. So right here, this is a common Unity page that you'll be seeing. Obviously, a 3D game as complex as this, probably we won't get to probably. But this is just a good example of a Unity workspace that you'll be seeing. So number one, you see right here. Oh, that's just called a scene. Okay. Right here, where you see hierarchy, you see some of them are written in black letter, some of them are written as blue letter, and it says here on prefab. So prefab is you can notice that it is a prefab if it is written in blue, and if it's written in black, that means it's just a regular game object. So if you click on something like it's highlighted here, first person controlled prefab, you'll see that there's a cube right there. That also indicates that it is a prefab. Another thing is that if you highlight it or click on it, it will give you an inspector and it'll give you everything that is needed. Since this is a first-person controller, you don't see anything down here. But for a regular object, you'll see attach a new component or something like that. Add new component or something like that. There you can add scripts. You can add different physics and all that. So we'll be getting into that later on. Here. So those kind of things that contain arrows right next to them, they're called folders. Folders are a great way for you to actually get organized. Let's see. Oh, number 4 right here. So it says game here. If you see this button right here, that's just a play button. So whatever you make in here, if you want it to play or if you wanted to do something, you always have to click this button and you'll be able to play your actual game if it works in this number 4 space right here listed as game. Right here, so when it says free aspect, it just lets you choose the different screen sizes. So different phones obviously have different screen sizes, and you can basically set it accordingly, and we'll be getting to that through scripts later on. So this is just another example. One of the things that wasn't there is right there. If you see that Unity symbol, that means it's a scene where you can place things. So they save this scene right here, and then they just put it into their project folder, as you can see here. Don't worry about most of these, but another thing is right here, where it says C# and it's sort of surrounded by like a white box, and it says idle walk. That's a script, and as you can see, it's code, and it seems like it's letting this character move, but we'll be getting into all that later on. And if you see this play button looking thing right here, all 4 of them, they're just animations. So like a person moves 1 foot, then the other foot, then the other foot, like that. So that would be a walking animation. Alright, so basic interface. We'll just be getting into this when we're actually doing the example. I think I've already explained to you briefly what scene, hierarchy, and inspector is. And game is just pretty self-explanatory, and project is just this entire thing right here as listed as project here. So when we go to physics, so there are a couple of physics components that we'll be looking at. Most of them are just mass and gravity. We won't be looking too much at velocity until we get into, like, for example, like a 3D game or anything, something like that. But definitely be looking at friction and bounciness. And the collisions are very important. Circle collider, box collider, and the polygon collider. Since we'll be working with 2D games, make sure that they're all set to 2D. If something doesn't contain 2D, chances are you're using the wrong one. So colliders, essentially, it creates a boundary around an object. So if any other objects basically touch that boundary, then the object with the collider will know that, oh, I have came to contact with something. So the reason why there are 3 different colliders is because they're used for basically different shapes. Circle collider, self-explanatory. It creates a circular boundary. Box collider, same thing, regular. There are cases when you have to use a polygon collider. Polygon collider essentially surrounds the entire shape as best as it can. And if you think about it, for example, if there's a character holding a gun, and there's like a ball falling at the character. If the ball hits the player, then obviously the player is dead. But if the player hits the gun, then the player isn't necessarily dead. So if you use a polygon collider, it will think that, oh, since gun is part of player, it must need a boundary. When in this case it doesn't. So then you would have to use the box collider, or if your player is circular, then circle collider, and try to fit in the player and trying to exclude the gun as much as possible. Alright, so this is just places where you can find components. So for sounds, we'll be using audio later on. One of the places that I really suggest is freesound.org. Freesound.org, all you need is just a simple account, and you can basically download songs that are built by some professionals as well as some like personal developers. It's a really good resource because it also has like a good search box that allows you to search for music for any different cases. Fonts, okay. So if you see like Flappy Bird, right? They're written in like a block language, and if you look at like maybe like a zombie game, then it's written in like a bloody language. Basically fonts do exactly that. So you can get fonts depending on what kind of a mood your game has, and one of the places I suggest you get is the font. And for assets, just any form of assets, like for example, for my previous game, I had to get like a wall of fire. So I just went to the Unity asset store. I just did fire and then space wall, and it gave me a whole bunch of searches that people uploaded to the asset store. There are some other places that you can get it to. A whole bunch of them I listed here, but probably your best place to go to is Unity Asset Store. Chances are Unity Asset Store has everything. All right, so this is the first task that we got to in club today. I'll be just trying to go through this, and if you just want to read this, if you want to pause the video and just read this, then you can. If you want to try it on your own, sure. But I have to teach you some of the functions, so it could be better if you follow along. Essentially, we'll be making a ball bounce. Ignore the part that says buttons because we did not get to that today. So ignore that part. We're going to be getting into buttons and actual scripting next class. So remember we created the first project, right here. So I want you to save this scene. So if you go to File and if you do Save Scene, right, then it lets you basically save as, right, if you haven't saved it before, which you haven't. So usually, the name of the scene that contains everything is usually just called game. So I'm just gonna title that, and where assets, of course, because it says right here in folder assets. So you just save that, and it appears right there. Since video game development, it gets really complicated no matter what kind of a game you're making. Even if you're making games as simple as Flappy Bird, you really need to get organized. So here's what I want you to do. For Mac, you would have to do Control-Click. For Windows, you can come to this space right here, where under Assets, right under Game, this huge space, do right-click for Windows. So when you go to Create, you can choose the option Folder. Okay, and now it lets you title the folder. So this shape right here, that's called a scene. So let's title this Scenes, because games generally have multiple scenes. I mean, even a simple game like Flappy Bird, it has a start screen and then a game screen. So it would have 2 scenes. So let's do that and just drag the scene into the scenes folder, and you should have it right there. Chances are you would never leave something that is not a folder in the assets place. So if you have the scenes, I'll be teaching you how to create the basic shape, or as we learned in the lecture, a game object. So come to this space again. Okay, first of all, I am going to be creating a folder called sprites. Sprites are essentially just the characters or any objects that are in the scene. So inside the sprites folder, this folder is empty right here. Right click for Windows again, control click for Mac, go to create, go to sprites, right? And let's create a square. Okay. If you want to create a square, I would title this a platform because you need a platform if you want for the ball to bounce on. So how you can put sprites into the scene, that's very simple. Just click on this, drag it over, and just place it wherever you want it. It'll generally get placed on the bottom unless you want your platform to be up here for some reason. So like that. And here's another trick. You see this boundary right here, right? Like that space. That's basically your scene. So what I want you to do is extend it out so that the platform somewhat fits this into the scene. Or here's another solution. You can make it go over the scene like this, because if you don't fill up the space, then it comes out as a blue space, and blue space isn't generally visually appealing. So it is better to just take a couple megabytes and try to fill the space as much as possible. So there, now you have a platform. Make sure that whenever you do something, you always save. File, save scene. Okay, so you have a platform. Now you need a ball, right? So, ball sprite, I want you to figure out how to create a ball sprite. Hint is that it's in the same place as the platform. Why don't you pause the video and try to figure out how to put the ball. Okay, you've tried to create a ball. If you're stuck, you can look at this part. So, as we did for the platform, come here, come to this place right here, because it's considered the sprite still, the ball. And in this space, do control click, or right click for Windows again, go to create, go to sprite, and here's a circle. I will title this ball, okay? And I'll just drag this over here, and there, now we have a ball in the scene. Okay, so if you save it, right, and try to click this play button, it'll go to the game. So if you click this, then this is a game that your basically your players will be seeing. You notice that the ball isn't dropping, the platform isn't doing anything. Why is that? Well, the simplest answer is that the ball doesn't have any gravity affecting it right now. So we'll be learning how to add gravity. So one of the things that we learned in the lecture, let's see, right here, is a rigid body. This will be your best friend. You'll need this for almost every game you make because it gives you mass, and it also allows you to pretty much do anything you desire in terms of physics. So what you want to do is you want to highlight ball. Okay, now you're selecting the ball right here as shown by this rectangle right here. If you notice here, that hand right there, that allows you to move through the scene. That one right there, that one lets you move the sprite that you've selected. This one lets you rotate your sprite. You can't see it here because that's just a ball, but that lets you rotate it. If you want it to be 0, just set the Z to 0 and you've problems fixed. And there's this one, which lets you expand it out and shrink it. Okay, the scale should just be 1, 1, 1 because it's a ball and it should be round. So if you click on this and click on that, then it gives you this inspector page right here, and it says add component. Click on that and type, oh, this is for the last class. So right here where it says add component, type rigid body, and remember, whenever we work on 2D environment, you always go for the 2D option, 2D. So now you can see things like mass, there's gravity scale, and there's a whole bunch of things that I'll be talking about later on. If you do this and save it and play, notice that the ball drops because it has a gravity scale. But if you look at it again, it's falling through the platform. Why is that? Well, the platform doesn't know that the ball touched the platform, and the ball doesn't know that it came in contact with the platform. To give an object an idea that it collided with something, you have to use a collider. So go to add components again. Okay, exit out if you searched anything, and type collider. And notice it gives you a whole bunch of options. You can think about this logically. So we're working in a 2D space. So whatever thing that doesn't have 2D in it are pretty much wrong. So you have a polygon collider, you have an edge collider, circle collider, and a box collider 2D. Which one do you think it is? For a ball that's perfectly circular, it'd probably be the circle collider 2D. So add that. Okay? Now let's play it because it has a collider, so it technically should collide. But if you notice, it still goes through. In Unity, both objects have to know that they have collided against each other. The ball knows that it collided with the platform, but the platform doesn't know that it collided with the ball. So let's go to platform, add component, and this time it would be a box collider 2D because it's a rectangular shape. So let's add that. Why would the platform not have a rigid body? Let's see what happens when you add a rigid body 2D to a platform. The platform drops. That's because the platform is stationary. It doesn't need gravity. So let's remove that. How to remove it? Go to rigid body, do a right click or a control click, and just do remove component. Let's save that. So now let's see if the ball collides with the platform. And it does. But it's not bouncing. You need this thing right here, bounciness, and probably friction as well. How can you add that? Alright, let's check that out. So, does the platform have to bounce? Probably not. The platform does not have to bounce, but the ball does. So that means we have to work with the ball. Notice here where it says material, and it says none, and it says physics material. Physics material allows you to bounce, and it allows you to work with friction. So if you click on this dot right here that you can see, that tiny dot, that lets you view everything that you can insert into this place. If you click on that, you'll see that it's none. That's because we haven't created anything. So I'll tell you how to create that. Let's go to assets again, right? So one of the things that you need to do is, again, make a folder, right? So go to create, folder, right? And in class, we just titled it bounce, right? That seems simple enough. So let's double click on that, and it just comes here. So in this space, do right click, create, okay? And if you go there, you'll see physics 2D material and physics material. Which one do you think is the right choice? Think about that. We're in a 2D game. If you're thinking physics 2D material is correct, then you've learned pretty well. Let's click on that, and it lets you create something. Now I have a feeling that people are looking at this place right here, inspector, where it says friction and bounciness. You've came to the right place. But let's name that. So let's name this just bounce, right? Seems simple enough. But bounciness right now is set to 0. Let's set that to 1. 1 generally lets you jump half the scene. So you jump from this place right here to maybe about here in one bounce. And friction just basically lowers the height of the bounce every time it bounces on the platform. Okay? So let's click the play button and see what happens. Oh, save it first. Let's click the play button. Notice that it still doesn't bounce. Why is that? Well, you have a bounce, but the ball doesn't know that you've created a bounce. Right? You see, remember right here where you're supposed to add that? So you can drag this over, and you'll notice that it highlights in blue. That means this, whatever you made here, can go into this box. So let's place it there. Now, the ball is able to bounce. Okay? But one of the other tasks is that what if you want to make 2 balls that bounce? Right? You don't want to just repeat all this process. Here's what you can do. Let's go to assets. Come here, control click, create. Let's go to folders. This time I want you to title it prefabs. If your light bulb just went out, that means you've paid attention to all my lectures. So let's title it prefabs, double click on it, and come here. Prefabs are basically like variables that you can repeat with the same components. So how you can make prefab is very simple. from this hierarchy view right here, drag whatever you want it to become a prefab into the prefab folder. Now you notice that blue box. If you're paying attention to my lecture, you'll realize that box means it is a prefab. Okay, and notice that it's also written in blue now. That also indicates that it's a prefab. You also want the ball to be a prefab as well. So let's do that and let's save it. Okay, here's a ball. If I want to create another ball, I would just go to sprites, do this, create, sprite, circle, and name it ball 2, right? But if you do ball 2 and drag it on here, right? This is ball 2, and I'll change the color of it so that you can notice it. That's a red ball. Notice that the red ball doesn't do anything. If you compare the inspector, this one has a circle collider and a rigid body 2D, but this one does not. But if you look at a prefab and drag a ball there and make this, let's say, blue, right? You'll notice that it behaves exactly like the white ball. That's because this was saved. It's essentially like a save button. So it contains rigid body, contains circle collider 2D. It also has bounce. Therefore, you can reuse this as many times as you want, and they'll all behave the exact same way as the first ball that you made. Pretty cool. Well, that's it for the first lecture. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Next class, we'll be doing some actual scripting, meaning we'll be working with actual code. So I highly suggest that you actually make it to the meeting if you can.